All right, we are all set on Facebook. Once again, thank you everyone for attending. We are very excited to have you with us for another Unifying Our Alumni Voice webinar. And today we're going to be welcoming Adela Cojab. She's from NYU, a former NYU student and Israel activist, and she's going to touch on a little bit about her experience as an Israel activist, what she's doing a little bit now in her personal life as an activist, and also her legal case that she waged at NYU against the university for discrimination and anti-Semitism. First we're going to do a presentation by Adela, and then we're going to hop into a Q&A section. So if you have any questions, if you're on Facebook Live, please write your question in the Facebook comment section. And if you're on Zoom with us, feel free to put your question in the Q&A and we will answer it once we get to the Q&A section. So without further ado, Adela.
Hi, thank you so much, Joel. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name's Adela Cojab. I'm originally from Mexico City. My family is Syrian Lebanese Jewish, and I grew up in Deal, New Jersey. When I was growing up, my #1 goal was to go to NYU, and I wanted to really move away from everything that was Jewish life. I wanted to study human rights, I wanted to study activism, and I wanted to mainly study Latin America because that's where I felt was my grounding anchor. But when I came to campus, I saw something a little bit different. I started walking through, I was a freshman, again, no intention in getting extremely involved in pro-Israel activism, and I saw a group of students that were holding flags in the park, and they started giving out the flags, and I took a flag, and I got in a circle, and everyone started singing Hatikva, and they started talking about people who lost their lives to terror in Israel earlier that week. It was 2015. There were bus rammings almost every other week. And I said, how did I go from growing up in a religious Jewish household as a modern Orthodox Jew to not even knowing that there was a terrorist attack in Israel where people who were close to my age were losing their lives? So immediately I got involved in the club. And next thing I know, I became vice president. And the year after that, I became president and served for 2 years. At NYU, things were pretty much how they are in every college, which is they're okay and nothing's important until it is. So student government, okay, no one really cared much about it. Anti-Israel life existed, but it was small. Maybe once a year we'd have an apartheid week of sorts. But for the most part, Jewish students felt very comfortable at NYU. After all, it is called NY Jew by some people who attend because we have such a strong and big Jewish population. But because our Jewish population is so big and we're so comfortable, we didn't get involved with bigger NYU life. So in my junior year in 2018, we saw a progression of events from February to May that were extremely alarming. And it all started with one mention of Zionism in a category of events that seemed to be unlike what I thought I was fighting for. So there was a group at NYU called GCOMS, which is the Governance Council of Minority and Marginalized Students. As a Latina, Middle Eastern, modern Orthodox Jewish woman, I felt that was a perfect place for me. But they released a statement one day saying that events on our university are taking us from hell and back, from racism to fascism to Zionism. I said, okay, Zionism is not the same as racism or fascism. Why is this included in this list of grievances? So we went back and forth between other students, between some administrators to see if there was a response we should publish. We wrote a letter together as the entire group, the entire Jewish community at NYU. We had 17 of the 19 Jewish clubs wrote this letter together that was not angry, but disappointed that people wouldn't understand why it would be hurtful to Jews to put Zionism in the same category as racism and fascism. Ultimately, we never published the letter, which was our first mistake, because we thought it would feed into a power politics narrative that the Jewish community is so large and so united, and they're going against a smaller marginalized community. By not publishing that letter, though, we distinguished that there was a difference between Jewish life at NYU and Israel life at NYU, which essentially at that point were almost entirely overlapped. From the mention of Zionism and racism and fascism in the same letter, we went to student government, which was where they proposed an anti-Israel resolution against the Tel Aviv campus. NYU is unlike other universities where BDS resolutions don't really have teeth. At NYU, we have a campus, actually the only American university to have an actual campus in Israel is NYU. And this letter against NYU Tel Aviv at that point could have some ramifications if it is enacted by the campus. So I had been on student government. I ran for a position. I was the senator representing Jewish students and students in Greek life, as well as international students, because the way that it works at NYU is you represent your multiple identities on student government. You as yourself choose the communities that you're representing. And I wasn't representing Zionists, I was representing Jews. But the resolution, no matter how much we tried to reason, showing that no student would ever be turned away from NYU Tel Aviv, NYU had a legal team to make sure that students that had visa problems could get in, specifically students of Palestinian descent. By trying to fight for reason with emotion, we lost. We walked into a battle we already knew was lost. We were able to get quite a number of extensions, but for the most part, that resolution we knew was going to go down the drain. While all this is happening, I started meeting with the administration. I brought forward the letter and I said, they put Zionism and fascism and racism in the same sentence. And they said, well, what do you want us to do? And I told the administrators, for now, nothing, but I feel something big is coming. So keep this on your radar. After that, we had the resolution and they said, what do you want us to do? And I said, for now, nothing, but know that something big is coming and you should keep this on your radar. After that, we had Apartheid Week coming up. And unlike other years, instead of being small, there was a relief statement of BDS by NYU's marginalized community, which was a coalition of 53 groups boycotting Realize Israel and Torch Pack, which are the only two pro-Israel groups at NYU. At that point, you had 53 groups against 2. The Jewish community, even though we had a lot of groups and we were heavily supported by it, at that point said, you know, we support Realize Israel, we're part of Realize Israel, but keep our club's names out of any letters of support. We'll support you, but we don't want to get our organizations, which might be, let's say, a Minyan or a Greek life organization. They didn't want to get involved in campus politics. So even though our number of supporters was the same, the organizations that supported us publicly went down. Once we had that letter of BDS to boycott not just Israel, but student-led clubs, I went to the administration and I said, okay, you're about to have a week's worth of protests. I know it's not going to be a small group, it's going to be 53 groups against the Jewish community. They asked what I should do. I said, for now, keep it on your radar until they release their flyers. The flyers that Students for Justice for Palestine used in their Apartheid Week campaign had assault rifles on them, and they called for a revolt. They quoted George Habash, which, if you read Time magazine, is called the godfather of terrorism, saying, revolt for you have nothing to lose but your chains. So now you have a flyer for a week's worth of protests with an assault rifle on it that's quoting a terrorist, calling for revolt and to take up arms. And that's when I went to school and I said, this is absolutely ridiculous. I understand you couldn't act in certain parts, and I understand that these are student-to-student conflicts, but at this point, safety could be involved. And we ended up doubling our security at all Realize Israel events, and wherever SJP had an event, we made sure that campus safety was nearby. Leading up to all of this, we had our big Yom HaAtzmaut celebration, the rave in the park, which at NYU is, we take over the Quad, Washington Square, which is a New York public park, and we have a huge party for Yom HaAtzmaut. We've done this 2 times before, that would be the 3rd year, and that year we knew a mobilized protest was in order. We saw a Facebook event that had over 270 attendees that were coming just to protest the event. So again, we spoke to the school and to NYPD, and we said, we have to make sure that people have a right to protest, but that it doesn't cross the line into jeopardizing student safety. So at this event, first we had one student come with an Israeli flag, stand in front of us and just light it on fire, throw it on the ground and watch it burn. That student was arrested by NYPD for, not for a hate crime, but for reckless endangerment and for lighting a fire in a public park. If you can't even light a cigarette, you think you can light a 6-foot flag on fire. Doesn't really work that way. And then, well, we always told everyone our protester engagement policy was do not engage. If you see protesters or event attendees, everyone who was a part of Realize Israel and the planning committees already knew if you saw someone engaging with a protester, you step in, you de-escalate the situation, and you make sure that everyone returns to their own lives. And all of that worked until we sang Hatikva. Again, the moment that forever got me so emotional. Singing Hatikva with Realize Israel in a public place in the park holding flags is the experience that got me involved in Israel life. And instead, while we're sitting singing Hatikva in a mass of people, one student who I actually had multiple classes with walked into the middle of the circle and pushed the girl holding a microphone, grabbed the microphone and started yelling, "Free Palestine." And that student was ultimately arrested for physical assault and property theft. At that point, a physical boundary was crossed. So I went to NYU and to the administration and said, okay, I understand why you didn't act and you didn't take action so many times before. They were statements, they were threats. I understand you said I was perceiving something, but at this point we've had physical action. Okay, a flag was burned, but the line was crossed between a student's physical safety, a student's physical body, a woman who was a freshman, with an able-bodied man who pushed her in an aggrieved manner, grabbed a microphone, and wounded her in the process. That's not a perceived threat anymore. That's an actual threat that has materialized. At that point, I really thought the university would stand up and take action. There were a lot of Jewish students that were messaging me saying, is this it? Is it time to press legal charges? They were outraged. They couldn't believe that their keynote event of the year was hijacked in a way that jeopardized student safety. And I spoke to the university. I told them people were looking to press legal charges, and they asked me to desist. They said, you're right, there was a threat, a line was crossed. We'll take action from our end, but we ask of you and your community to keep it quiet. We ask you don't draw attention to the issue, don't bring mad press, just let us do our job and we'll make sure that it gets taken care of. So I went to my own community, and as hard as it was, I told them I trust the school. And people were upset with me. People thought I was a weak leader. They told me I should step up. But I said that the school promised to act and I would trust my university. Over the summer, I was also asked by the administration of NYU not to post on my personal Facebook and to limit content being posted by Realize Israel. I remember it was around the time of the embassy move. As a pro-Israel advocacy group, we didn't even post about that because we were trying to keep a low profile. And over the summer, things got a little bit better. I willingly left my position on student government after I was surrounded and called a Nazi multiple times. And I went into the next year knowing that after I left my position, there would be no Jewish student representing the Jewish community at large at NYU on student government, because I knew that once I left, they wouldn't elect someone who shares my identities, because to them, I wasn't a Jewish student, I was a Zionist. So the next semester, lo and behold, another BZS resolution comes up. Of course, we know that student government is entirely anti-Israel. We showed up with over 300 students between the room itself, the part outside of the room, and the support that we received outside of the Kimmel Center for Student Life. We knew we had the numbers if it came to a referendum, but we didn't have the votes. We didn't have a seat on student government, let alone have allies who had seats. Because if you supported the pro-Israel movements at NYU or supported the Jewish community's right to defend itself or to self-determination, then suddenly you weren't apt to be on student government. You weren't enough of a student activist. You weren't woke enough. So again, that resolution passed with very few abstentions and very few votes against, but we didn't see it as a loss. Instead, we shifted our entire campaign to shedding light on the way that NYU student government keeps out student voices. It works like Greek life, where outgoing senators select the incoming senators, where they put up your picture and your application on a screen, and we sit in a room of 60 people, and vote who we're selecting for the next year. And that's how you get a self-selecting process where you make sure that no Zionists get elected. So the year continued to go on, and things calmed down. Things calmed down. The BDS resolution passed, and I was about to start my senior spring semester, my very last semester at NYU, at my dream university. I was vice president of my sorority at the time. I left student government. I was building my own major in Middle Eastern diaspora structures. And then NYU gave the award for presidential service and outstanding contributions to NYU life to Students for Justice in Palestine. To be honest, when I first saw the award, I said, typical, and I just scrolled past. And then everyone started sending it to me saying, hey, have you seen this? Did you see SJP got the President's Service Award? Did you see? And I started thinking, and I said, no, this isn't right. It isn't right that there's a group that continues to aggrieve my community, a group that was violent and was never punished in a group way. There was an entire organization that spent 2 semesters trying to make Jewish students feel uncomfortable, where one of their executive board members literally posted on Facebook, my goal is to make Zionists uncomfortable because they shouldn't feel comfortable on our campus, and then doubled down on his statements when he was asked about it by press. Their goal is to make us uncomfortable. They're the ones that committed an act that ended in 2 arrests against my community, and they're the ones who are getting an award for president's service. Now, it would have been okay if NYU did nothing. It would have even been fine if after all this happened, after the rave in the park, after everything leading up, I understand leading up to the rave, there wasn't enough to do. I understand that. After the rave in the park, I understand them telling me that they're going to take action and then really not doing much. But to proactively step back and say, this group is exemplar. You want to be an exemplar group at NYU, follow exactly what this group has done. And that's when I saw I was played, for lack of a better word. The administration asked me not to draw attention to a real issue that really compromised student safety, that put an entire community on edge, so they can ignore me and then later give that same group an award. That was showing me they really didn't care. So I tried to get in touch with every administrator. The year before, I had met with administrators across 5 different departments, 8 different administrators. I was on everyone's email feed. It got to the point that when people said like, oh, like when I emailed someone, if they told me to talk to Student Affairs, they said, yeah, we were expecting your email. Because Student Affairs sent me to Center for Student Life, and Center for Student Life sent me to Center for Multicultural Education, who sent me back to Student Affairs, who sent me to Student Safety, who sent me to Public Safety, who sent me to Student Conduct. Every department I was referred to, I had spoken to about the issues that were forming. I had cases open in every relevant department about how this one organization was making Jewish existence on campus difficult. I had Jewish students coming to me saying, should I take the Realize Israel sticker off of my computer because I don't want to walk into class and have everyone know that I'm a Zionist. And that's what hurts me the most. And I let that happen so the school could turn around and give an award less than a calendar year after the events happened. Every administrator I had spoken to, every administrator I was referred to, refused to answer my calls. Every time I called, at one point I had an administrator answer. And when he found out it was me, he said, just leave a message with my secretary, I'm very busy, and hung up. Because Adela was a problem. I finally got in touch with one administrator. I sat outside his office until he walked out. And he said, Adela, I don't have time for this. And I said, I need to talk about this award. He said he doesn't have time, and he asked me to meet him in the first week of May. At this point, it was early April. I graduate the second week of May. So I realized they don't actually want to work through the problem. They're just waiting for me to graduate because they see me as the problem. So as soon as I walked out of the office, I got in touch with lawyers. It was the first week of April. And I said, do you still have the lawsuit that we wanted to file last year after the rave in the park? They said yes. And I asked if it's possible for me to file again. Now here's where we're getting to more technical information about Title VI. So what exactly is Title VI? It's been in the news a lot since December. So Title VI is under the Office of Civil Rights, and it says that students of minority backgrounds from nationality and race have protections on campuses, and that's campuses that are both in college, high school, in the education system at large. Religion is not a protected class under Title VI. So if a Jewish student or a Muslim student or a Christian student is being harassed for their religion, they wouldn't have been protected. If anyone's being harassed on the basis of their race, nationality, ethnicity, or perceived race, nationality, and ethnicity, then at that point it'd be considered okay. Or protected under Title VI, where the government would get involved, and if the school doesn't take action to change what happened, the discrimination, then the school would lose federal funding. So I spoke with my lawyers, and they told me that my case was extremely strong. They told me that the way that Title VI can work is with a clause of shared ancestry. If I can make the point that we weren't being attacked for being Jews, we were being attacked because we share a certain ancestry, and that ancestry was the target of the attacks, that the school knew about them beforehand, could have prevented them, and after the fact didn't take steps to remedy it, then my case would have a lot of footing. And they told me my case was so strong it could potentially make history in Jewish law in the United States. And I said, where do I sign? Immediately. I was done with this. I said, I have 2 months left in the school, even less, 6 weeks. And I'm not going to leave without filing a big boy grievance, because I couldn't imagine graduating and having students have to go through everything I went through every bureaucratic step just to get the school to admit that physical assault of Jewish students is wrong. So I filed my case, and the press got wind. We sent it out to as many news outlets as we can in the East and West Coast. And as soon as everything went public, I got a call from the same administrator who told me he couldn't meet till the first week of May, and said, hey, I've been seeing a lot of news coverage. Do you have any time to speak? And I said, I'm really sorry. I'm only available the first week of May. And I made him wait. And that was the most powerful moment of my college career, because instead of walking into a room with an administrator where I sit as a student and say, explain this award, how did this happen? You know, my community. Instead, I was able to walk in with a timeline of every time I met with him, every time he told me I was overreacting, and every time he could have taken action and decided not to, because that wasn't on me and that was on the school. And because he wouldn't give me 20 minutes, he would have to deal with years worth of lawsuits. So I graduated NYU after filing a Title VI complaint against the school and taking legal action. I finished the semester and I spent the whole summer trying to get word out about my case, meeting with as much of the press as I can, being on as many podcasts and shows as I could be, and speaking at conferences. I was speaking at IAC this past December, Israel American Committee, and I was speaking on a panel about student activism, as I do. And then they told me the 2 days before the conference, they asked if I'd be willing to stand on stage with the President of the United States. Now, I don't know where everyone here falls politically, but I am Mexican. I'm in this country on a visa. I've never held a US citizenship, and I don't even have a green card. My politics aside, I completely agreed. Not because I specifically support or don't support the president, but because number one, I was being recognized by the most powerful man in the country where I live and plan to build a life, telling me your struggle mattered and Jewish students are important. If the president of Mexico, who I completely do not agree with, gave me the same opportunity to stand on the stage being honored and talk about my cases with students and Jewish student rights, I would immediately say yes to. So I accepted. And at that point, I just thought I'd be standing on stage. And then I was told I'd be speaking on stage. So in December, I went on stage with the President of the United States. I spoke about student safety. I spoke about the case at NYU. And 3 days later, the president signed an executive order that added Judaism officially as a protection under Title VI. That means that every time, like every step I had to take that someone else wouldn't have to, now a Jewish student knows they're protected. Not only does a Jewish student know they're protected, but universities know that Jewish students are protected. When I was the only Jewish student taking Arabic and everyone refused to partner with me because I was the Zionist in the class, that was considered okay. But if for one moment a person of color was in a class full of white students and no one would partner with her, regardless of her politics, that would be an issue where the government would step in. So why is it different for Jews? Now, on the executive order, my case was accepted without the executive order. I used shared ancestry. I used the idea that we had our Jewish flag, the flag of Israel, that we were all connected under, burned at Yom HaTzmaut, which is a celebration of the culmination of the Jewish dream of our shared ancestry. A student was assaulted during Hatikvah, the hope, the anthem of our shared ancestry. I couldn't file my case as anti-Semitism. I had to jump every hoop and say this wasn't religion, this was ancestry. But to me, my religion and my ancestry are very much intertwined. I'm proudly a Syrian, Lebanese, Jewish, Mexican woman. And I shouldn't have to give up any of those identities to feel like I belong on a college campus, or to be able to walk on a college campus and feel that my safety is compromised. So the executive order changed a lot, but it wasn't revolutionary. The executive order made it easier for students to stand up for themselves and made it so universities have to take them seriously. But at least I'm very proud to live in a country where we've had a legal system where if the facts are right and the case is right, you can stand up for yourself. Now I continue my Israel advocacy by working for an organization called Maccabee Task Force. They're an Israel advocacy organization that focuses on student government and getting people to Israel to see it themselves. It was the only organization that where when I was a student, didn't give me any hurdles. They said, how do you want to advocate? And let me do what I needed to do to have my campus become more pro-Israel, to understand my narrative and to build coalitions. So as a full-time worker for Maccabee Task Force, I'm very proud of what I do. And when I look back and when I speak at conferences and I hear of students that have gone through even worse than what we saw at NYU, it makes me very proud of the work I do. And it makes me very happy to know that if that student would want to press charges, they can. So that's a little bit of my story, and I'm very happy to turn it now to Joel for questions.
Awesome. Thank you for Adela for diving into that a little bit. And I think a lot of us have a lot of questions, and I think we already have 3 already. So I'll just dive right into it. But before I get to the crowd questions, I just have a setup question for you that I think informs a lot of their questions is, what are the most important lessons you learned while fighting anti-Semitism at NYU that you believe every Jewish and Zionist student should know?
That is a great question. And I say this with as much passion as I can. When I saw things happening and I brought it up to the administration, they kept telling me I was overreacting. And I said, you know what, you're right, maybe I am. Maybe we should tone it down. When we had the rave in the park and a student was physically assaulted, people were telling me, well, what were you expecting? You were in a public place in New York celebrating Israel with flags everywhere, singing Israeli music and music in Hebrew. Of course, if you're out in public, what were you expecting? And I thought they were right. I said, you know what? Yeah, I maybe should have saw this coming. Maybe it is our fault. They told me like, hey, maybe tone it down on your social media. Maybe don't post from your Realize Israel Facebook page. And I said, yeah, you're right. Maybe we should keep a lower profile on social media. And that's when I realized the biggest issue with the Jewish people. And it's an issue that we've had for centuries. When Jewish people are stepped on, we apologize, move over and say, maybe our foot shouldn't have been there in the first place. And that way we let other people claim space. And you saw this during Hanukkah. You see, Jews that are out in public wearing a kippah that get attacked. And you say, well, maybe they shouldn't be walking outside so visibly Jewish. Okay, maybe. But then you have Jewish people who are in their own homes, a rabbi hosting a Hanukkah party in his house, and someone walks in with a machete with intention to kill. And Hanukkah has two main things we associate with it. We have the menorah and we have a dreidel, right? The dreidel was when people would pass by, you say, no, we're not learning about Judaism, we're just spinning a dreidel, right? And the menorah was the actual commandment. The dreidel is not a commandment. The dreidel is just something that they added. It's a nice custom. It's a nice idea. But the commandment that God gives us is to light the menorah in a public place. Why? Because you want to tell everyone that you're Jewish. You want to stand proudly. And that's the biggest lesson that I learned during all of this. I shouldn't have to apologize for having a pro-Israel celebration in the park. I shouldn't say, yeah, I was going to get physically assaulted. I should have seen that coming. Not at all. If there's one thing I can learn, it's to not be afraid to take up space. Because when we let other people, when we let others decide where a Jew can and cannot feel comfortable and where a Jew should and should not be Jewish, that's when we let anti-Semitism win. So I'm going to stand my ground. And I hope that every student listening to this stands theirs too.
Thank you. That was a wonderful answer. I think the next question I'm going to go to is from John. He's an Army vet and anti-extremism activist. And his question is, do you think we could perhaps create a knowledge hub between campuses and the counter-extremism community to share our best knowledge of how to combat the common problem of anti-Jewish propaganda and hate?
I think 100%. I don't know how I can help with that, but for example, I know that every campus has what they call sensitivity trainings, right? I was in Greek life, I was in student government, I was very involved in campus life, I was in resident hall life. We always have to go through sensitivity trainings where you sit down and you go through what's considered sensitive and how to best be accommodating to others on campus. It's something that all campus leaders have to go through. Why can't we include Jewish issues in the same sensitivity training? Why can't we walk up and say, and by the way, burning Jewish flags is bad? If the counter-extremism community, which has compiled knowledge and has extensive research, if they can develop a program to put on college campuses, either through speakers or through working with administration directly to implement a program, I'd be fully behind it. I just don't know how much I can particularly help with that. I can give my insights into student advocacy, I could give my insights into student life, but I think that extremism, both on the right and on the left, is something that's incubated in college campuses. It's a time for growth. It's a time where people want to find identities. And sometimes you feel if you don't stand strong enough for one thing, you're a fraud. And that's how you see people getting extremized and polarized. You couldn't walk into a certain class without having to talk about things that you believe in. When you introduced yourself, you wouldn't introduce yourself as who you are. You would introduce into what you believe in, which is such a weird way to start a class, especially a dance class. Taking a class on documentaries and suddenly you're saying, oh, well, I'm here because I was oppressed. I feel like the way that NYU students, I'm not going to talk about the teachers, the way that NYU students perceive themselves on campus is as a, building on their own experiences. And they feel like if they don't wear it outside, they're going to be brought down by their whole community. So if we can help these students be able to see that they can be people without being extreme, I'm fully for it.
You talked a little bit about how the administration at NYU puts programs into place to alleviate the symptoms or even the causes of bigotry on campus generally. But why do you think that NYU administrators dismissed your request to address campus anti-Semitism specifically?
I think because it's easy. I think that, Jews, there's a lot of Jewish students at NYU, right? We do relatively well economically, and we do relatively well in terms of our education, right? And we don't get very involved in NYU life, again, because our Jewish life at NYU is so comfortable. We have a wonderfully strong Hillel and a wonderfully strong Chabad that aren't at odds with each other. If you're a Jewish student at NYU, you have a kosher cafeteria. You have an entire dorm where you could dorm there and you have kosher food right downstairs. That's amazing. That's something I didn't know other colleges didn't have, an entire kosher cafeteria that's also kosher for Passover. So I think when I spoke to the administration, they made it like they already gave us so much. Why can I ask for more? And that's something I saw in Jewish professionals too. They mean well, but when I originally wanted to press my case, I had Jewish professionals that work at NYU say it was a terrible idea. And I filed without their knowledge, and I called them the day before it all hit the press to let them know I finally went through with it, because I wanted to do it for a long time and I always held back. And the day before, when I called them to let them know and give them a heads up, they were on the phone with me for about 2 hours to tell me that I just let off a nuclear bomb, that I walked away without even knowing what I caused, that I just ruined the Jewish community at NYU single-handedly, that the administration does so much for the Jewish community and I'm going to complain about it. But you know what? That's an abusive relationship, to say, hey, don't bring up what could be better, or don't bring up things that are wrong because maybe they'll take that away from you. That's not how it should work. So I think that if Jewish students, number one, participated more in NYU life, that's, let's say, BDS. Why did BDS pass 2 times at NYU? Because we didn't have Jewish students other than me who wanted to get involved in student government at NYU. So of course it was going to pass. For the administration, I think it's because they already know that we're pretty comfortable. So why would they take me seriously? Why? Because I wasn't going to take to the press. And I told them from the beginning, if I did, that the headlines would read, "Student sues NYU for anti-Semitism," and that would look bad on them. But for some reason, it just didn't seem like a priority. I think it's because they knew that Jews are always going to be comfortable at NYU. And we have so many Jewish donors, no one's going to believe this, but it happened.
And where was the faculty in all of this?
Faculty. So faculty is wonderful on the anti-Israel side. We had a lot of pro-Israel faculty. We actually even have, not only do we have the Skirbel Center for Jewish Studies at NYU, we actually have the Taub Center for Israel Studies. So we have a whole department that's an Israel Studies department, but no professors would stand publicly with the pro-Israel community. They wouldn't even co-sponsor events. On the anti-Israel side, you would have Students for Justice in Palestine hosting an event that was co-sponsored by 6 departments. They got BDS to sign over 70 faculty members supporting BDS. And when I went to the Jewish Center Studies and the Israel Center Studies, they said that unlike other faculty, they don't get involved in student affairs. I asked if they'd co-sponsor an event with, let's say, if we brought in the ambassador of Israel to the UN, they said, no, it's a political event. Bring an educational event that has to do with maybe an archaeological finding, and that's something we could co-sponsor. And that really hurt because it made us feel alone. The professors have always been supportive, but they won't publicly put themselves on the edge the way that the professors on the anti-Israel side do.
And since your actions were taken at NYU, what has NYU actually done to tackle anti-Semitism following the lawsuit?
So funny enough, they haven't spoken to me. I've spoken to donors and I've spoken to members of the board of trustees, but they all reached out to me individually. So NYU, the way that all of this could have gone down was they could have reached out to me, asked me for the way I see things can improve, and I could have given them that list. Instead, they asked the leaders who are now presidents and vice presidents of Realize Israel, which is exactly how they should have done it. Of that list, I'm not sure what they implemented, but NYU is really striving to make it clear that they want to stand with their Jewish community. So though they haven't done really anything in student life, for example, changing the way student elections work for student government, they did have the president of NYU, the president of the university himself went to the anti-Semitism walk which I think is amazing. He went publicly with students, walked with students saying, I stand against anti-Semitism. Nice statement. During the Havdalah Under the Stars event, which is a 1,000-person event held by the NYU Hillel, the president spoke up and he said, NYU Tel Aviv is an integral part of our campus and the Jewish community is an integral part of our campus, and it's important to support both, which is also really nice. But all this is formality. So people keep telling me every time that BDS is passed, NYU has made a statement against it, right? The administration. They always say every time BDS passes, say NYU will not support BDS. Great, that's awesome. But my issue wasn't really with the ideology of the administration. My issue was the actions on campus weren't being handled the way that they should. For example, the 2 students that were arrested, they had the entire club, the entire coalition of clubs, the 53 clubs, camped out and supported them at the courthouse saying, we support our comrades, because, you know, socialism's all the rage. So he said, we support our comrades, we support our comrades. When I spoke to NYU, I said, this isn't an issue about, you know, 2 students who took actions into their own hands. This is a whole group that is applauding extreme action. So my goal was for the entire group to have to go through a sensitivity training, something like that, or for the club to get suspended, or for the club to know, like, hey, 2 of your members who you actively support is physically assaulted someone. Can you at least denounce them? I know for me, if a member of my organization burned a Palestinian flag and then another member physically assaulted a Palestinian girl, I would denounce them immediately. I would say that's not what Realize Israel stands for. And I would immediately reach out to that community and say, how can I help you? Is there anything my community can do to make you feel safer? And maybe that's because I'm weak, but no, I think it's because I'm fair. But that's not what we got on the other side. Instead, we got them applauding, not even a single apology. So what has NYU done? I think they've done a lot of great PR things, but what have they actually done in terms of their policy and the way they react to student violence? Not much.
Thank you for that. That's a very enlightening answer. And I think we actually have someone who's offering their legal aid as an attorney, because their question is, 1, did you seek legal representation for your fight? And I think you answered that a little bit. And 2, are you open to more attorneys and legal professionals offering their time and talents to assist you in this battle?
So thank you so much. I spoke to the Brandeis Center, which is a wonderful resource, and they put me in touch with 2 superstar lawyers and 2 other lawyers that did a little bit more of the paperwork. Having Joel Siegel and Neil Scher on my case was amazing in terms of the PR too. It got my case a lot further than I thought it would. They handled most of the paperwork. They prepped me a little bit. And then when I had all my meetings with the Office of Civil Rights and the Department of Education, I was speaking entirely from my own truth, and they were guiding me a little bit in terms of the questions, which is very helpful. Where my case stands now, it was already accepted by the Office of Civil Rights. So right now it's just an investigation conducted by the Department of Education to see at what extent NYU was at fault. Because it was discrimination was going to occur, the university was aware, discrimination occurred, the university didn't act. And actually took actions that aggrieved it, but that's just, you know, an extra. So it's just making sure that that timeline holds, and to what extent does that timeline hold. So at this point, I don't need any more legal representation on my own case, thank God, but I know that there's a lot of schools that need it. So if you haven't been in touch with the Lawfare Project or with Brandeis Center, which are both pro bono organizations, you can reach out, offer your services there. And I know personally at Columbia University and at UCLA, the 2 students that filed their Title VI after the executive order are actually friends of mine. So I know that there's students in universities across the US that could really use the legal counsel.
I think this is the last question about your, personal experience, and then the rest are going to you'll be able to provide your experience, your expertise on how we can move forward as a movement. But did you find that having taken this action has impacted your life after the fact, and how so?
Yes, entirely. Even though I don't regret it at all, it really changed the entire course of my life, I think. First of all, the decision to first get involved in Israel advocacy changed my time at NYU. I was going to study law and society and Middle Eastern and Latin American studies. I joined this pro-Israel group. Next thing I know, I'm building my own major in Middle Eastern diaspora structures and what it means to be a diaspora, to have a home but elsewhere. I'm a Middle Eastern diaspora member, but I'm a Jewish diaspora, and I'm right now in the Mexican diaspora in New York, and what all of that means. And it changed my entire education, right? Changed my experience. I had a lot of friends who I lost because I was a very public Zionist. There were days I'd walk into class and people would look at me and say, "That's a Zionist." And I was like, okay, cool. Got to the point that my senior year, I didn't even take classes that had to do with my original major. I took dance because I couldn't walk into a class and just be that person anymore. When I filed my lawsuit, it made me a face, mainly inspirational, which was great. I heard from a lot of students. I had students reaching out to me who happened to hear about my case left and right. Hugging my dean at graduation was awkward, not gonna lie. I felt it would affect applying to law school in the future, retaliation, not just from NYU, but what university is gonna accept the girl that sued, you know? Might sound nice, but it also sounds like a problem. And then after I spoke on stage with the president, things also changed. Get a lot of hate from the right, get a lot of hate from the left. It was a lot, but I knew I was ready for it. From the beginning, you know, I spoke to my mom. Before filing the lawsuit, I always spoke to my mom, and I told her that this is something I needed to do. And she agreed. She said, if this is what I want to do. So now I see everything in terms of fairness and legality. It really changed the way I think. It makes me want to pursue a career in law where I can help students who were like me. At first it was a Zionism, now it's the legal end. I think that had I not filed this lawsuit, number one, I'd always have regret. And number two, I wouldn't feel that I'd be able to actually impact anything. Volunteering my time would be great, but at that point, I didn't act when I could. So I look back and I say, right now I'm 23. I'm exactly a year as of Friday out of college. And in my 1 year that I graduated, I was able to give hope to so many Jewish students and actually contribute to an executive order that changed the status to students on the ground. So I don't regret it. I don't recommend it for everyone. If you're not ready to take on this public figure profile on getting all of the hate from all sides and from changing relationships that you already have in your life, where people will either suddenly love you or suddenly hate you, or you'll lose a lot of followers, Facebook friends, you name it, then it might not be for you. But I know it's the best decision I could have made.
And I think we're all supportive of you and your decision, and whatever comes of it, whatever may come, we're all here for you in your decision. And I think before we move on to some general movement questions, I just want to remind our members that if you are interested in helping students like Adela who are dealing with campus legal issues, there's a lot of organizations out there that can help. Lawfare Project, they are an amazing organization. They have a full legal team. They're one of the organizations that's leading the state BDS campaigns alongside the JNF, the Jewish Federations of North America. And we also have the side-off legal department at Stand With Us. That's where the Center for Combating Anti-Semitism is. So there's a lot of legal resources, and feel free to use them and reach out to us if you're interested in dedicating your time and talents to those causes.
If I may, there really fast. So actually, Alums for Campus Fairness was very helpful to me when I was a student. When we had between the two BDS votes and when we originally had my lawsuit, I was in touch with the Alums for Campus Fairness, and they actually wrote an amazing petition, put together a great website that got us a lot of support and a lot of publicity to be able to get what was happening at NYU out. The thing is that what happens at NYU can happen at a lot of schools, but the reason why you heard about this was because we had so many allies like Alums for Campus Fairness that used their network to actually get the word out, get change. End of the day, if there's no eyes on NYU, there's no reason for NYU to change. So thank you so much for that.
Of course, and we're always going to be there for you, for NYU students. And if you're not part of our network, we have almost 600 people at NYU, and we're always looking to grow and add more people to our team. So please reach out to us if you're interested in being involved as an NYU alumnus. Next question. What is your advice for students who are harassed and discriminated against for their religious beliefs and or support for Israel? And I guess that what I'm asking for is your advice for them outside of, going to a legal organization. What can they do to stand themselves on the ground?
So I actually don't even recommend taking legal action immediately. I think that for me, it really took a lot. It took a culmination of 2 years of harassment and extraneous action by the university that just made everything worse and had no regard for Jewish safety, that I took legal action. So I don't recommend taking legal action if it's not absolutely necessary. Now, if this is a one-off event, I recommend trying to solve it on a student-to-student level with the administration's knowledge. If it's happening, it's recurring and it's happening over and over, maybe let's say on a bi-monthly basis, every time that you hold a pro-Israel event, you're expecting already to have a large counter protest that could end violently. Again, keep the administration in the loop. That's what I did when, even when they were things that the administration doesn't really get involved in, like, let's say a letter of support that puts Zionism and racism in the same category, and Nazism, that was a nice pork in there. There's nothing a university could do. They can condemn a statement. That doesn't really do much, but at least I kept them in the loop. I let them know every step of the way that something was building. That way, and I kept it all on paper trail. That way, when you look back, you can't say they didn't know this was happening. I let them know. So for students who are facing harassment on campuses, number one, stay strong. Number two, make sure that the university and public safety are in the loop, even if there's not much that they can do. But number three, and most importantly, make sure that you are safe. It's always great to swoop in there and be the hero, to swoop in there in front of the protester and say, well, I'm a proud Zionist, and get up and do the arguing. But sometimes it's not the best decision. So care for your personal safety, care for the safety of those around you. And maybe this is coming from where I'm an advocate as opposed to an activist. I had to become an activist. An advocate works more behind the scenes to find a solution that's viable. Even if it doesn't make both sides entirely happy, you find a compromise. That's always been me, hence why I meet with administrators. The activist stands outside with a megaphone and yells that everything's going to shit. Now, I was not an activist until NYU didn't listen to advocacy, and I had to become an activist. I had to stand outside, I had to make the noise, I had to do the negative press, and I had to put myself in front of a lot of people who I did not want to be in front of, who weren't very friendly. So make sure you can tolerate the hostility, know what you're getting into, and care for your safety.
I have a question from Arlene de Julio, and she's asking, why does NYU even allow SJP to be recognized student organization on campus, even though they're hosting programs like Israel Apartheid Week, hosting BDS campaigns, both, you know, as referendums or resolutions in student governments, as well as targeting, in NYU's situation, targeting a boycott against two university organizations?
So it's a good question. And that's a matter of freedom of speech. So for example, in Fordham University, they did manage to get SJP kicked off of campus because of the way that they were behaving. But 2 years later, that was actually revoked, and they filed a lawsuit against Quartum with Palestine Legal, saying that it was discrimination to kick off the Palestinian Support Club. So I think that, and this is something I grapple with every day, when it comes to freedom of speech, where's the issue? Let's say this executive order doesn't infringe on people's freedom of speech. There's a difference between speech and action and intent and action. So the reason why at Fordham, you know, this turned into a lawsuit and it was revoked and it was an entire mess is because at Fordham, the actions that were taken were things like Apartheid Week, which is, you know, dispelling lies, spewing disgusting things, but end of the day, that is protected under freedom of speech. But at NYU, those same words were backed with actions, and they were violent actions that ended in arrest by NYPD. So where do you cross the line between freedom of speech and something that can be, you know, protected against by the government? Where does the government step in? And that's where the freedom of speech is discriminatory and promotes action. So it's unfortunate that NYU has an organization called SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine. And it's unfortunate that Students for Justice in Palestine acts the way they do towards the Jewish and Zionist communities at NYU, because I know it's something that we would never do on our end. I can't imagine walking by and seeing a Palestinian student and being like, that's the Palestinian, with spite. I can't imagine. But it's the same thing with Israel and Palestine, or the territories. It's unequal warfare, where we're under a microscope, we're seen as having the higher ground. So it's okay if they do things that we would never do. It's okay for them to, you know, have missiles and ram vans into people, even though it's something we would never do. End of the day, it's not okay. But NYU can't just kick out a student group until they've taken action. Now, at NYU specifically, SJP should not exist. I'm sorry, SJP NYU took actions that should immediately revoke their student charter. I worked with student government. I know what's in club charters. They are a contract. And if you violate a contract, you get your charter revoked. Why do they get to spend $2,000 per semester of NYU funds to be able to promote hatred and physical attacks on students they disagree with? Forget Jewish and Zionist. That's not a correct use of university funds. So SJP at NYU, legally speaking, should not have a case. The issue is that NYU is very loose with their charters. It doesn't actually say, for example, if you abuse a student on campus as part of an organization, you get kicked off. They also said social media. They said, you know, they harass you guys on social media, they post pictures of you guys, but we can't extend our reach as a university to social media. Meanwhile, remember, I represented Greek life on student government. I very well know, number one, if I post a picture on social media with alcohol as a minor, my entire sorority can't recruit for spring for one person. So also saying, why can we punish a whole organization on the actions of 2 of their members? Why can you kick all of Greek life off? 2 organizations got into a fight with each other, 2 kids got into a fight outside a bar. Why can you kick off a whole organization? Same thing, they said that NYU Park, Washington Square, as much as we consider it part of the NYU campus, is a public park. So this didn't actually happen on campus. Great, neither is the bar where you had a fraternity fight. So the issue is that NYU has double standards. They say they can't apply rules to social media when they know they can. They say they can't take group actions for what individuals did, which they can and they do. And that's what makes me go so crazy here. So why does SJP exist at NYU? I don't know. I have no idea. It makes no sense. They should have been at least suspended, if not kicked off entirely. Why does it exist elsewhere? Because of freedom of speech. And that's something that we can't infringe upon, as long as their actions don't cross into harassment.
Do you think the executive order labeling Judaism as a nationality will help stem the tide of anti-Semitic activity on campus?
So that's one of the misconceptions. I think that people think that it makes Judaism a nationality. That's not what it does. It just clarifies that under this thing that protects nationality, race, and ethnicity, you also have shared ancestry, which includes Judaism. So it puts it in the same category, but it doesn't make it an actual nationality. But I do think it's going to help a lot on college campuses. I think that, you know, in a way, and at least you saw this all the way at the beginning, it did inflame some things because it made people angry. It said, you know, from, you know, the anti-Israel side said, well, why can't I criticize Zionism? This is unfair and infringing on my right of freedom of speech. And then from the Jewish side, it said, well, it looks like they're making us check off boxes, and this is reminiscent of the Nuremberg trials, or I guess Nuremberg laws. I think it's neither of those, and I think that those are 2 very big misconceptions. I think number 1, you can still criticize Zionism, you just can't do it in a way that's harassing or discriminatory, the same way that if I wanted to say racist, disgusting, like anti-Black things, I can say them, but there's consequences if the actions I take are discriminatory and harassing. It's the same thing. You can still be a virulent anti-Semite, but if you do it in certain ways that are harassing or discriminatory, where actions are taken, then there's going to be consequences. Now, for putting us in a category of making Jews a nationality, it doesn't. Again, my lawsuit was accepted without this executive order. It was a shared ancestry. And if you believe that attacking Israel attacks your Jewish ancestry, then you fall under this category, whether or not the president says so. What I wish would have been done was if they put religions under shared ancestry and not just Judaism. I think the issue is that by singling out that Judaism is specifically protected, as grateful as I am, also made us a target. Because if they would have said Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and other religions of cultural ancestral ties, then who can attack this? I can't imagine a hijabi wearing student saying, oh, if someone attacks me for wearing a hijab, that should be okay. No, that shouldn't be okay. And I wish they didn't make it look like we only cared about ourselves.
Yes, and I think that's that has a potential to come back to bite Jewish students across the country, but hopefully that doesn't happen. And I guess hopefully we have organizations like ours, or legal organizations, or your organization, that are there to step in and help students when they have to deal with the consequences of the perception of the executive order. So thank you for touching on that. And I guess we have time for one more question, and I've saved the best for last. What is your advice for alumni who want to help fight anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism at their alma maters?
So great question, and I love it. And it's what I do, which is number 1, keep in touch with the students who are there on the ground, or at least follow it on social media and in the news as much as you can. So for me, I'm lucky enough, I'm only a year out. So I do know the students that took over Realize Israel, the students who are now Jewish students on student government representing the Jewish community. We now have 4, which is crazy. We went from having me to having no one to having 4. I speak to them regularly. I ask how they're doing. I ask what they see. For the most part at NYU, luckily things died down. SJP is virtually non-existent. They hold maybe 2 events per semester, and they're very inward facing. They're not building large coalitions. So I'm keeping in touch. If you can't keep in touch and you're at least following in, you know, the press, what you can do, an organization like Alumnus for Campus Fairness can start campaigns. So for example, using petitions, that was extremely helpful at NYU. We had so many NYU alums sending emails to NYU when this whole lawsuit originally came out, when the award originally came out, when the BDS vote was going through. They were sending emails directly to the president of the university and to the president of student affairs saying, this is wrong. I'm an alumnus and I'm ashamed that this is my university and that this is how you're acting. And the volume really helps. But at times, alumni, and I saw this when I was a student, sometimes they can do a little bit of harm. So if a petition isn't phrased the right way, or if something wasn't said the way you wanted it to be said, and now students suddenly have to defend the actions that the alums are saying. Or for example, when I originally decided to keep it quiet, if alumni had come in to blow up the situation that happened in the rave in the park, that would have made it as if like the excuse of the university is that we had a deal, you keep it quiet, we take action, you didn't keep it quiet, we don't take action. So I'd say to check in with the students, see what the students need. If you don't have connection to the students directly, organizations like Alums for Campus Fairness usually have great insight into it through ICC, Israel on Campus Coalition. So if you're an alum, keep in touch as much as you can and keep in the network of the organizations that are seeing what's happening there. I know how grateful I am for all the alum support. I actually, through alums, I was able to connect with board of directors and trustees at NYU who approached me separately to ask, what can NYU be doing better? And that was an unreal connection. So, and also for the alumnus that offered their legal services, thank you so much. That's really helpful. And I'm sure that a lot of students are going to be able to make use of it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Adela, for joining us for an enlightening conversation and for sharing your experience with all of our alumni members. And we really appreciate you hopping on this webinar with us. And we hope that you enjoy the rest of your quarantine period as much as you can. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone stays safe.
All right, stay safe. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.